Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome to a different intro, because I like the glitch thing, but it didn't make a ton of sense, because, I'm not really dealing with glitches, I don't think. I'm not into coding, but you know what? Today's very special, at least in terms of recording, because we're finally finishing a long and exhaustive series. We are finally finishing the math rock chart. And today we are basically discussing almost the entirety of Zach Hill's output up until the creation of this chart. This is the Zach Hill zone the chart has designated. And it designates because, it's kind of an eternal thing. It's a JPEG and it exists on the internet. And it's currently on my phone and it's probably up on your screen in about now. But after all this math rock we covered, because we've gone through some electronic stuff, starting with some more emo stuff, going in a bit more of an alt direction, going to some punky stuff, some EDM dance stuff, and then just to straight blitzed avant-garde jazz territory, we've now reached Zach Hill, which has a few different defining characteristics for all the material of his we're about to cover. Some of it is beyond avant-garde, so much so that it's literally super difficult to digest, extremely difficult to listen to in any regard, because some of it's just so weird. And at the same time, we've got some of the best albums I've ever heard, to be completely honest with you. We've already found one Zach Hill record on here, which was the debut of Hella, but now we're about to talk about the other material here. And a lot of these are good, a lot of these are not as good, but quite the eclectic mix. And I think after listing this section, it's pretty easy to say that Zach Hill is one of the best artists of all time, just in sheer ambition. And I wish I had a specific order to talk about these in other than what was presented to me. And a lot of this stuff makes me kind of reconsider the popularity of some things in Zach Hill's output, because what's most popular may not be his best. But the first thing we'll talk about is the album Shred Earthship with Zach Hill featuring mx+b. This is not a solo Zach Hill record, because of the solo Zach Hill records, you can absolutely identify a sound that is so definitive. Now, mx+b, if you don't know who that is, he's in a lot of really weird bands that I couldn't tell you exactly what they do. But interestingly enough, he's in a band called Krallis that dropped an album in the year of our Lord 2022, which was it's a black metal band, and they make like avant-garde black metal. I did not care for it very much, and the same thing goes for this LP, because mx+b doing avant-garde chromatic riffs just isn't really for me. Basically, imagine Hella without the hookiness, without the interesting motifs, being as free form as possible. It's like me having a jam session with my friends, but I'm not good at jamming, so it kind of just feels like it's on top. Sure, it can be syncopated or just unison at points, but I'm really not getting a lot here that is worth listening to. But, at least I can confirm that we're starting at the bottom here. But that makes me question the placement of this album on the chart, because it's not one you want to start with. It points to other stuff though. But I would give this. I'm not gonna waste you guys' time. I'm gonna give this a poor. I could have given it an okay, but I don't even feel like it. And here's the thing: a lot of Zach Hill's albums get criticized for having all songs sounding the same. This album, they all sounded the same. Some other ones, they do not at all sound the same, and I'm going to get to those, and I'm excited to get to those, because I think some of the criticisms on those are completely invalid. But next we get the Zach Hill and Robbie Moncrief, I want to say, collaboration album. This is called Who Do You Think You Aren't, and this is pointed to from Shred Earthship with the designation of with synths. And because it's synthesizers, you already get a bit of a boost in terms of concept, and this isn't the first time we're going to get synth layers on a Zach Hill record here. Especially because the fact that Andy Morin ends up jumping on production for, I think, his last solo record. And this album is short, just 25 minutes long. Sometimes some electronic drums are used. Sometimes it's the typical normal set of drums. And occasionally you get more piano style parts. A lot of times it's like keyboards. Occasionally you get the more of the interesting sort of analog synth setup, but a lot of times it's just like jazz playing, I guess. But it's like less sort of like interesting jazz playing from your typical jazz pianist, and more like avant-garde hooky stuff, like hella style, if that makes any sense. But I will say it's very dissonant and it's very hypnotic, and that's kind of the appeal here. And this is the first time in my listening experience that I found Zach Hill having restraint on a record, because he shows a lot of restraint. He shows some subtlety as well, and it really works well with the synth layers as a whole. The final track on this LP here sounds very much like Mr. Bungle. It's a cool track. Overall, this album is a step in the right direction, but I'm gonna give it a good. I don't love it. And that is one flaw you'll see with this section here. Having a whole Zach Hill zone, I find not the best thing. And that's the thing, charts can't really give a ton of context. I actually found recently an Instagram page that makes these charts with a ton of context. And honestly, I don't really need that level of context, but at the same time, it's nice to know that some stuff are just included for completionist's sake or because it's popular. Because sometimes when you talk about stuff like this, you need to consider things that are popular. And when I do the conclusion of this video, I will have to talk about context and what this chart is lacking. And after this, we get more Hella with Hella's The Devil Isn't Red. It's the second Hella record, and it's their best. This is a slightly more raw produced album, and you're gonna see in some ways Hella can have this as a bit of an issue, but when it's all instrumental and it's this teeth grindingly brutal, percussive, like punch you in the face level of hard hitting, it's actually a perfect production style, and I literally couldn't find a better way to do it myself. And it's never a numbing record, actually. It's never like so hypnotic that you like stop paying attention. It's just face meltingly brutal stuff. In terms of brutal prog, it doesn't get any more brutalness. It's a lot like the debut Hella record, but I think it's just more realized. The songwriting is just better overall. The melodies work a little bit better. It's a little bit more varied, and it's just like a more thought out version. But I could say a whole lot with this record. Please listen. This is an easy great. This is literally an album that's on my Topsters as we speak. I know, cringe, but like it's that good. And I don't actually think this is the best album we're talking about today, too. So hold your horses. And after this, we get Hella's There's No 666 in Outer Space. There are two more Hella records after this one, both vastly different from each other, but There's No 666 in Outer Space is different because this is the only time they have a full band. This is when they have a vocalist and a bassist as well. And it's still with the crunchy production. And here's the thing about that. And also 59-minute long album. Hella is typically having these under 40 minutes, ultra tight, ultra bombastic, really in your face, punchy, aggressive melodies. Perfect stuff for a live setting, perfect stuff for a set, perfect stuff for anything, really. Just great albums. And then you have a 59-minute brutal prog math rock record with a weird folk vocalist, which Zach Hill loved way too much because he decided to do similar vocals on everything since, including an album that was right before, which is the other Hella album that we'll be discussing. That isn't, well, Tripper. But stylistically, this thing just doesn't work as well as they wanted to. And one thing that's kind of interesting here, and especially with the vocals, this actually feels a little bit like Claypool-Lennon Delirium, the collab between Sean Lennon and Les Claypool. I don't think it's like, I mean, both are lacking in some ways. I mean, both are fine bands, I guess, but it has that level of quirkiness. This is an album that it feels a bit compressed in a way that doesn't help the production. I think it kind of sterilizes it a little bit. And I will say that the later tracks on this album do get better. They're much more hard-hitting, and it's a way that feels kind of like some older albums I've talked about. Like there's plenty of them that I can't really remember, but it's ones where the vocals could be like super repetitive and they just sort of dig under your skin like that. There's I forget the name of the band, but if you guys look back, there was a band I talked about that mostly makes like
pop and like punk music, but they have one album for some reason that's no wave math rock. And I mean, that should tell you what it is, if you for some reason know more about my videos than I do. But anyway, this album is good, and for the later half, it's good. If you want to be a completionist, I wouldn't blame you. Next is With ORL, aka El Grupo Nuevo de Omar Rodriguez Lopez, and you're probably wondering who is that. Kind of an interesting outsider thing here. Omar Rodriguez Lopez is the guitarist, I'm pretty sure, of the Mars Volta, and the vocalist of that band shows up too. Here's the thing about the Mars Volta. I don't like them. I don't think they're a very good band, to be honest. Knowing Pitchfork gave them such low scores, I actually totally understand it. It's like that type of band that I feel like if you don't do a copious amount of drugs, you don't actually enjoy them. It's not like Tool, where Tool is like, yeah, drugs would probably help this, but it's great. I feel like Mars Volta is a band that you need to do drugs to or be a nerd with like no life. And it's coming from a guy whose like first genre discovery was prog. Like, I love so many prog albums, but how does their sound work with Zach Hill involved? And this is the band's one album output. Really remarkable piece of music here. Do I love it? I'm gonna say no, but I like it enough to say that you should listen to it, especially if you like Mars Volta, and especially if you love Zach Hill. You might like it more than I did. But in comparison to the last Hella album that I talked about, this is a very full sound, impeccable sound. It's more rhythmic prog. It's more like rolling and in your face, and it's similar to Hella, where it's like so rhythmic, but it's not like the ultra simple rhythms. It's like you get a full measure or two, and it's pummeling you over and over again. The song Cryptamnesia is basically free jazz with vocals, and I think it's pretty incredible, actually. The song Noir is very engaging. I think it's one of the most incredible songs on the record. But I'm feeling good on this record. I don't hate it. I think it's good. And next we get, for some reason, the album before 666 in Outer Space. This is another Hella album, Church Gone Wild / Chirpin' Hard. And this album's a weird one because it's credited as Hella, but it's not really a Hella record. It's basically a Zach and Nick split LP almost, except it's not a split LP, it's a split double LP. They basically both make their own album and put it back against each other. And here's just a summary of how the album is. Zach Hill gets the first side, which is some of his least intelligent songwriting. It's honestly not very fun to listen to. It's so many movements that have his vocals that really don't work without distortion and reverb and all these extra effects. It's kinda annoying, and it just feels like really tired, like religious criticism that's just it's stuff I've heard since the 80s, and it was better in the 80s because it was fresh, but it's just not fresh anymore. It just feels like watching a Rick and Morty episode, or like several in a row Rick and Morty episodes. And the thing is, Zach can't play guitar like at all. I mean, he might say that he can. I love the guy. He's a great musician, but his guitar playing is not where it's at. But his side of the album, he does the drums, the guitar, I think the bass, and every other instrument, and it's just not where it is. And then the Chirpin' Hard side, you got Nick, or Spencer is his name, and I've been messing it up this whole recording. But his side is something that's pretty good, actually. It's actually a side that I rather enjoy. For the first half of his side, it's like brutal prog, basically, and his drumming is not as amazing as Zach Hill, but his guitar playing has been another critical role of Hella up until this point, and I think it's a great addition. And also his vocals are not bad, really. But what's cool is Spencer here has actually like coined a genre known as like Nintendo core, I think. And he brings it on, I guess, the B side of his half, or the D side of the whole record, I want to say. I want to say because I don't actually know. But he brings the sound for the whole half, and I don't love it. It's not a genre that I think has a ton of potential. But what it is it's novel. It's kind of fun. So this album as a whole was kind of aggravating to sit through, as it was really long, over an hour and a half, I want to say. I literally did like, when I was listening to this, I did like every chore in my house, including cooking and eating dinner, and that's just not something I need in my life. But it's okay. I'm gonna say it's okay. Do I recommend it? Not really. Am I gonna listen to it again? Probably not. Especially not when right after we get Zach Hill's debut record, Astrological Straits. Now, right after this, we're going to talk about Face Tat, which is Zach Hill's most popular record. It's about a 40-minute record where he makes this synth punk, noise rock, math rock fusion that is his style. But Astrological Straits is an hour and a half sort of prelude to that combines elements of Hella and elements of his solo work and elements of Marnie Stern that we'll get into with what would eventually be Face Tat. Face Tat feels like Zach Hill made his best commercial effort, but Astrological Straits is one of the greatest albums ever. This is an album that I will gush about, and this is the best album we're talking about today, basically. To me, Face Tat feels like a side project to this. This is a pummeling, revitalizing, and energizing piece of music that never gets old even once. If I were to describe this album in like one sentence, it would be Zach Hill dies the next day. Because every song here feels like he lets every single hit out on the table. Like, and Zach Hill is the type of drummer where it feels like that a lot. But this is one of the most like mortifying records in terms of sheer like grasping with reality. It's so bizarre, and all of these songs are phenomenal. You got two sides here. You got two discs rather, and the first disc is all these different tracks with him collaborating with all these different artists, including Les Claypool towards the end, who Les Claypool plays some of his best playing I've ever heard, where Les Claypool, he normally has like really cool rhythmic stuff that he probably invented after only like a minute of thinking, but here he plays his best soloing, the most complex rhythmic lines I've heard him play, and Zach doesn't miss a second, and all of these songs are incredibly energizing, and they just surge forward and forward and forward. And the second disc is one song known as The Necromancer, where there are two vocalists, I want to say, who do a spoken word piece at the beginning about a necromancer. And what precedes is at least 28 minutes of Zach Hill and a jazz pianist playing the most amazing freeform avant-garde jazz you will ever hear. A lot of subdued bits, a lot of amazing bits. And as someone who criticizes jazz piano all the time for being boring, it's nailed right on the head. And this is like the type of track that will sink into you to the most bizarre and weird feelings. I was folding my bed sheets along like the middle of this record, and there were specific licks that were held for an extended amount of time. And this would leave me looking at my blank white sheet and just staring at it with no thoughts. Very like grounding record here. The song The Necromancer is one of the most grounding songs like ever. Like, it's nothing will bring you back into reality like this will. So what do I think of Astrological Straits? I mean, I've made it clear. I'm positive I've made it clear. In terms of anything Zach Hill has worked on, anything at all, as far as I can tell so far, this is probably the best thing he has ever made. And don't go in my comments, Mr. I've been listening to music for 1 year, and say, but the Money Store. No, I'm including the Money Store. I didn't forget Zach Hill was in Death Grips. I didn't forget that he's been doing weird avant-garde stuff since this chart was made. I haven't forgotten the fact that he's had a bit of a resurgence the past couple years with a few singles with other groups. It doesn't matter, because Astrological Straits is one of the best albums of all time. And it's a hell of an album to come out this deep into the chart, where at the top you've got like albums like Spiderland, like this mysterious little blip out of Kentucky, or like American Football, a mysterious blip in terms of Midwest emo. And you've got all this stuff that feels really interesting and really cool, but none of it feels like an artist is going to die. And it feels like Zach Hill is going to die here. But this is great. It is a masterpiece, an absolute recommendation. And please do not let the length of the album scare you, because it scared me, and it's worth every second. But after this is Face Tat, and I'm glad that the quality doesn't really dip that much. This is an incredibly artful album full of interesting, bizarre, psychedelic wanderings. It's groovy as hell. Calling it math rock, I think, is a little generous, but the drumming is so good that you can't really fault it. Songs like Jackers really get you engaged, and you can really tell that like Zach Hill was like primed for his Death Grips material with this album, because it's the hookiest album he's probably ever worked on up until Death Grips. The song Total Recall is basically a punk song that will give you cardiac arrest because it's just that aggressive. But this album's great. I mean, you probably didn't need me to tell you that, but just in case, it's great. And finally, we have reached Tripper by Hella, the final Hella album so far, and it's really one where they go back to their roots, except there is a third member, one Andy Morin, on production. And he doesn't show up that much, but this is probably the cleanest Hella sound so far. But it's also one of the most effective, because Spencer's guitar playing is probably the most diverse it's been so far. A lot of more interesting licks, almost some solos here and there. There's some nice tremolo riffs, and whatever fuzz pedal he's using is excellent, and I want to know what it is, because the tone of the guitar for this whole album is just phenomenal. The song Netgear is just a super fun one, because it's slowed after like half or 2/3 into the syrupy dreamscape, which is clearly like all analog and like not that hard to tell how it happened, but like its effect is prominent and it works. And I hate to say it, but oddly enough, a bassist would have actually helped a couple of these tracks with the slightly clearer production, probably. But I think that was really just a note for like the beginning, because like it's a great album. I give this another great. Just kind of shows how rock solid Spencer and Zach are. And next, it's Zach Hill going into math pop with by his band Bygones. This is another two-piece band of him and a guitarist, except there are now vocals. But here's the thing about this album. For the beginning, it doesn't even feel poppy. It's kind of bright and it's kind of hooky, but it doesn't actually feel like poppy. And the guitarist here is Nick from Terra Melos, which is probably who I got confused earlier. This is another album that I think bass would have benefited, but once you reach the second half, it becomes a lot more hypnotic. It's really an album that grows on you, even if the beginning is not that appealing. I give this one a good. And up next, we have Marnie Stern with the distinguisher of female vocals, and the album title is, let me get my notes, This Is It, and I Am It, and You Are It, and So Is That, and He Is It, and She Is It, and It Is It, and That Is That. Basically, if you like Bygones, you'll love Marnie Stern. There's a lot more subtlety in the drumming, and much better hooks, and just, it's a better album. And the vocals are super fun. It's kind of like Riot Girl stuff going on, and it's fun. Some really beautiful tapped guitar parts that I am all over. There's sort of like a post-hardcore jam style for like half this record, and I'm all over that style. And the vocals are good too. I can't even lie. This album gets a great. I don't want to spoil anything else about it, but I think it's really just worth a listen. And after that, we get Marnie Stern's self-titled record. And here's the thing about these two albums. Listening to them a day apart, not a lot of differences you can tell, but there's some subtle ones. And both albums are great, actually. Basically, if you want something a bit poppier, imagine Is This It? I'm not going to say the whole title, but this isn't the Strokes record. I'm talking about Marnie Stern here. Think about that mixed with Fang Island, which was a math rock album I reviewed way back, part 3, I want to say. And again, the guitar tapping parts are incredible. It's one of the best parts. And what's interesting is Zach Hill's sort of opened up snare sound actually fits here, not just stylistically, but sonically. It actually kind of resonates in the mix super well and interestingly. And it's something I think producers nowadays should maybe listen to this record and take a note or two from it. But this is another great album. Marnie Stern is one of the most winning bands on this whole chart. So I recommend this. And after this, we get pointed to hardcore punk with Spiritual Bankruptcy by Bygones. Now, I listened to this before a lot of these albums on this part because it's a very short, like 20 minutes, and it is hardcore punk. Here's how I can describe this. Imagine hardcore punk where the guitar player and the drummer are just way better than normal punk musicians. So, with whatever your punk musician can play in that much amount of time, they fill it in with tom fills and crazy cymbal crashes and insane guitar playing, and they're just yelling over the top. In a way, it's like a gimmick, but at the same time, it's like the logical conclusion to hardcore punk in a few ways. It's not really taking the style in some crazy direction, but it's just like throwing some of the best musicians of all time here, and it's honestly a hilarious concept. And I think it's executed fantastically. This is one of the most fun albums on this whole chart, even if it's just an EP. The song Brutal Honesty is like 4 minutes long, and what's funny is this actually feels epic in scope because it's so much longer, and it's so interesting. I think it's one of the most fun songs I've heard in a long time. But yeah, this is great. And finally, with less guitars and more synths, we get the band Chill Pill with no eyes, just CHLL space PLL, with Aggressively Humble. Now, this album is more minimalist and psychedelic than a lot of these here. It's got like some really cool minimalist synth layers, but sometimes it gets really maximalist. This is another blended mix of the traditional drum setup and the electronic drum kit, both of which are used very well. There's some cool call and response stuff between sort of like a keyboard sound and the drums, of course. In a way, this is like rhythmic trance here with some mathy fills. The track Pass Out is one of my favorites here. And in terms of like weird albums here, this is one of the weirdest albums I've heard ever. Just like the mix of stuff here is so much like, it's like anti-commercial. It's like, who even would go out of their way to be like, you know what I feel like today? Math EDM. It's like, it's not even IDM. It's just like crazy drumming synths. Like, really bizarre album here. Not that it's bad. It's very good. I could not give it a vibe, but I think it's awesome. And there's also like a couple satirical like spoken word passages between these two artists, just being like, "We're Chill Pill, hi," and it's super funny. But you got a lot of variety on this album here that I wish I could go into more. But if you want an album to like give you more of a completionist idea of this chart, and you want to go down to a good one and find something that's just interesting, this is one of the most interesting albums here. But that's good. By the way, I'm gonna end with that. So that's the chart. I'm gonna close my book. However many freaking albums later that was, because that was preposterously huge. That was 15 albums today after strings of 10 albums in a row. So what is that, like 65, 70 in a row for math rock? I have no idea. An exhausting chart. And I'm about to cover a different exhausting chart, where I'm covering the shoegaze chart, which I'll be starting in probably a couple weeks. I imagine I have to have a filler video after this. But this whole chart is messy, and I was referring context earlier. What I meant by that is there are several bands that kind of have to be mentioned here because all this stuff feels like, look who's connected to who. And it's like, look, they're all working with each other, and that's cool and all. But you gotta mention Trico, which is a 3-piece like pop math rock band. You gotta mention Polyphia, probably one time, and I know I don't want to do that either. I think it's silly. Don't want to mention Polyphia. And I think, like, in terms of like doubling down so hard on these specific artists and just covering whatever little thing they do, I think something that'd be better is do like what the shoegaze chart would do. Be like, what genre does this lead me to? Where does it dip its toes into? With different like adjacent stuff, because like the Zach Hill mentions are cool, even if not all of them are good. But like at the top, you got stuff that's like not all that mathy, but it's like post-hardcore stuff that leads into math rock. This chart is super dense and heavy, and it doesn't segue as well as it wants to. There are also a couple albums here that like are really hard to find for some reason. But yeah, Polyphia, and Trico, you gotta mention. But I feel like with some of the stuff that's so aggressively hardcore, especially with like Drive Like Jehu, you could easily point that towards like math grind. And if you want to be silly, go all the way to deathcore. But I wouldn't do that myself. But I would point towards Converge, Dillinger Escape Plan, for example. And you don't gotta dive into that, because what I'm gonna cover the shoegaze chart in a few weeks is a lot of times it's like go listen to more of his genre if you're really into that, because no one is doing these videos. Believe me, I've checked, and no one's just gonna like scrape this whole thing clean, because I'm kind of just saying the efficacy of all this stuff in its giant illogical mass. But I think covering a bit more of the popular stuff could be helpful. You know, there are a couple albums you could totally cut from this. Several, I would argue, honestly. The Zach Hill Zone is cool, but it doesn't need to be this extensive, I guess. But it's a decent chart. I'm glad I covered it. I'm glad I'm done. Nearly 40 minutes into recording this, but it's about it. What do you think about these albums? What do you think about math rock? Is it my favorite genre? I'm gonna say no. There's just too much that isn't great as a part of it, but it's totally worth checking out, I guess. That's about it. Leave a like and subscribe if it's okay with you. Comments, questions, and concerns down below. I would appreciate those greatly. Social media's in the description, including the Discord page. I posted plenty of these albums in the math rock channel, or I think I did under either jazz or progressive rock or something like that, because I have so many channels. I'm really not trying to extend it any further. But that's about it. Hope you guys doing well. Hope to see you guys next time. Have a good day. Bye.